the catastrophe alone is something that is stressful and needs to be taken care of. And there are a lot of ways that I think we need to emphasize that as caretakers, as, as therapists. But then there's also this kind of identity crisis that can occur amidst the crisis, the kind of like, who am I amidst all of this? I think for people whose houses have burned down, who am I now that my house is gone? There's clients that have lost their schools, lost their community, lost places where they meet with people. They may have not lost the people per se, but they've lost those places that were significant to them. So the question becomes, who am I and who is my community when these kind of significant psychological placeholders are now missing?
Yeah.
Are literally in ashes.
When things fall apart like that, often we go to our attachment, the place that feels safe, the connections that we have, and we need to be able to fall back when life gets hard. I mean, that's why we have families. That's why we have relationships.
Yeah.
And yet for a lot of people, when they fall back like that, they don't just see a secure place to just feel like it's going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
There's some fractures as well.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk to me about that with couples, about what it's like to go through a catastrophe and then to feel something wrong in your own relationship?
Yeah, I like that you specifically brought up the pulling back, because in these sort of crises, I think what happens to our brains, the term that comes to mind for me is our allostatic load. So that term just simply means, the weight that our brain can carry at a certain amount of time. And the crises like these, disasters like these, really do a number on our allostatic load, because we have to attend to things like, if your house burned down, you have to attend to insurance. If your house was even damaged by the fires, you have to attend to insurance.
Mm-hmm.
That takes multiple hours out of your week.
Yeah.
If you have to change locations for a time, if you're displaced at the time being, you have to figure out details with that. If your kid's school burned down, you have to figure out new ways that your kids can be educated. So there's just constant new things that get added onto your life. And I think something that I've seen with a lot of couples is they've noticed this new change, the significant weight on their shoulders, but they're still trying to operate at the same allostatic load or the same load that they were carrying before the crisis. And I think that's causing a lot of couple stress, a lot of my clients' stress, where they're basically asking themselves the question, who am I amidst, all of these crises? And they're trying to basically work themselves back into normalcy, and it's not working.
Mm-hmm.
So it's causing this kind of continued stress of, now we're not even connected with each other because we're both trying to just survive.
Okay, so it's kind of like they each have like a backpack on that they don't realize. You ever have that moment where it's like you have a backpack, you kind of forget that you're carrying something, until you go, whoa, something like my shoulder hurts or it's too heavy.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what I'm picturing when you say that, like an allostatic load. It's kind of like another term for stress, or what's the load on the system.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a load that each person is carrying, but then there's also a relationship load as well, because each person, whether they're meaning to or not, is coming to the other person with some kind of emotional need for security, right? And then when that happens, when there's all that load placed on them, what do you see happen in a relationship where they're both loaded down, where they're trying to act like things are normal, but something's definitely not normal under stress here?
Yeah, I think there's two. I think there's two responses that I've seen most commonly, and it's not hilarious, but it is kind of ironic how, especially in these times, couples can relate to one another. I think there's two responses. One is, imagine yourself, we're going to use this backpack analogy. Imagine yourself, you're hiking up a mountain and you have this backpack. Well, given this crisis, you just added a 45-pound plate into your backpack. So both of you are now operating with a brand new load of weight. One person is going to stop at a rock and basically sit there and say, you know what, we don't need to climb up this. Let's just stop entirely. Let's just act like it, act like it didn't happen. Let's act like the backpack's not there. I just need to sit here and act like the world is back to normal, like nothing ever happened. And there's another person in that relationship that says, no, we need to be climbing up this mountain as fast as possible, faster maybe than how we were climbing before the crisis. And I think that can really lead to like some couple crazy making, because one thinks we need to stop. We need to act like it's not existing. And the other thinks we can't stop. We can't stop because safety is at the top of the hill.
And the more one person slows down, the more the other person starts tugging and pushing.
Yeah.
So using that analogy, what do you think is the top of the mountain that they're both trying to get to?
I think there's a twofold to that. I think that there is safety.
Yeah.
And I think homes especially provide us a lot of psychological comfort. It tells us when we get home from a hard day, or when we are, just getting out of traffic, that, hey, this is shelter for you. You can at least calm down here. You can at least be yourself here. And when you don't have that, even if you are in an Airbnb that is technically psychologically safe for you, or even physically safe for you, there is a psychological comfort that you are missing, that you are now having to kind of re-ingrain for yourself. And I think that a lot of couples and families that have experienced this crisis, lost their homes, things like that, they are longing to kind of retreat again to that psychological comfort that they had before this catastrophe.
Yeah, they're both longing for safety. They both want to be at home or to be okay.
Yeah.
And one of them goes, I can't handle this. I don't want to sift through this.
Yeah.
The other one is going kind of like, we need to sift through this, and feels kind of like there's a fire that needs to be put out, or there's something needs to be done to get back to home.
Yeah. And I think that's where those two responses really come into play. Is one is trying to find it right now. One is trying to basically say, we have everything we need to just relax and retreat, away from all these stressful things, kind of shelter us away from the stressful environment, which is, how do we pay our taxes right now? How do we, all of these kind of things, let's shelter ourselves away from it. And then we have the other person who says, no, we need to keep going and not stop.
Yeah. So like, what does that look like on a day-to-day basis with a couple? Let's say they both come home from work or whatever their situation is. They're doing dinner. I'm picturing like, can you help somebody, let's say, who's listening, who might be experiencing something like this, like the extra stress in the relationship, to identify what might that be looking like or feeling like at the end of their day when they come home, to feel like one person just wants to rest and the other person, let's say, wants to, I don't know what that is, argue it out or talk it out or something like this. Yeah. What do you think is happening there? If we just kind of locate that at the end of the day there for a couple.
Yeah. So what we're doing right now is like we're picturing basically what the interaction looks like, what the argument looks like. Yeah, I think both are coming home with their regular patterns. They've done their work, and they may be coming home, or just one person coming home. And I imagine the person with the backpack on that decides to stop, that's a typical withdrawing pattern. And so what I would imagine they would be doing as soon as they get home is just kind of retreating to wherever they feel the safest, whether that's the bedroom or whether that's, the bathroom, or
checking out.
Yeah. Checking out. That's exactly right. So they may be on their phone. I think definitely screen time has increased for a lot of couples who are, or especially individuals who are in that withdrawal pattern. And so they're getting home and they're really wanting to just numb out, basically be like, I'm going to check out for a little bit. I'm not going to attend to these things. The other person may have been waiting to attend to these things, may have been waiting for the other person to get home, or waiting all day at work to basically attend to their internal to-do list of here is everything that we need to get done today or this week, so that we can, at the end of the race, kind of feel comfortable. So I think that dynamic, how it shows up is, one person is going to be kind of like retreating away while the other starts kind of pursuing that person to basically say, hey, like, pay attention. This is important. And that can be extremely stressful to the person who's retreating. It can also be extremely stressful for the pursuer who's not getting what they are really looking for, who might be getting, literally the person physically turning away from them as they're trying to be attended to.
So the person who pulls away, it's like they're totally flooded. Yeah. They're totally stressed. They want to pull back in a way and somehow take the load off. The other person, though, when they see that, they freak out and they go, I need you. Where are you going? But when they express that, the pursuer gets totally more flooded, more overwhelmed. I mean, I can see how that just quickly builds into, how do you avoid an argument at that point or something that creates more stress? Okay, so this is kind of the situation that people, I'm sure, come in and they're in the middle of that, pursue withdraw pattern, or the one who really needs something, who's really like chomping at the bit, needs to resolve something in them. And then the other one who is just totally overwhelmed. Which one of those tends to reach out for the couples therapy?
Let's see.
Do they both do it equally, or is it like the pursuer, the one who's trying to resolve things? Is that who?
I think typically it's the pursuer. The withdrawer that reaches out, in the few times that I've seen that happen, typically says, this person told me that I needed to get some therapy. So that presents like an interesting conversation too. Like, why do you think though that you need therapy, and what might you need? But I think it is typically the person who's in that pursuer dynamic, just constantly running themselves out of energy, trying to save the relationship or fight for the relationship. And it's coming out sideways and they don't know what to do.
I think sometimes the assumption is that the person who's withdrawing just doesn't care about the relationship. Can you speak to that a little bit? What do you usually see when you, like, is that true that the person who's withdrawing cares less about the relationship, or how else would you describe that?
No, I don't think that it is that way. I think that regularly in that dynamic, it can be very, especially on the surface, it looks like the pursuer cares more about the relationship. And that might be the narrative that they're operating off of, especially if that pursuer has a lot of control of that family narrative. But the withdrawer, I think what is so interesting about the withdrawer is they actually care really deeply about doing the right thing and about showing up in the right way. And so when they are even slightly pricked in a way by the pursuer who might be critiquing them, or again, their pursuing is coming out sideways. So it may come out like blame. It may come out like shaming them. It may come out like, you don't do this or you don't do enough of that. What that's going to do to the withdrawer is to say, I'm not good enough. So I need to retreat and numb and soothe because this person isn't providing that kind of soothing of maybe I am good enough in the relationship. The other person might also feel like they're not good enough in the relationship, but they're wanting to kind of confirm that by, going towards the person, like leaning in to basically say, do you think that, I'm a good partner? Do you think that the withdrawer is more going to start looking for it in other spaces?
Yeah. Okay. So there are these things that they're kind of telling each other behind their words, right? One of them, when they're withdrawing, they're kind of, not that they're intentionally meaning to do this, but they're trying to send up a signal like, I don't feel like I'm good enough, or I don't feel like, something comes to my mind when I think about couples is like, when someone withdraws is like, there's too much demanded of me and I can't meet it. I just can't do it. I can't do what you're asking me to do. And so I feel like a failure, and I just want to withdraw. I feel like this kind of part of me that just wants to crumple in, I can't do it. Whereas the other person, when they're pursuing, they're kind of like, I need you. Where are you? I need you close with me. Yeah. I need your help. And if you're close with me, I would cool down. I would feel a lot more calm. I would feel a lot more collected. Yeah. But we don't express it to each other like this, right? Okay, so I'm thinking about somebody listening, and them trying to put themselves in one of those categories,
Yeah.
in our relationships. I think in some relationships we can kind of sometimes be in either role, and that's like a healthy thing, is that sometimes we feel like more the pursuer. I can think of times in my own life where I felt more like withdrawing, from the relationship, or like feeling like it's just too much. But I can think of other moments where I feel myself like I need you. I feel myself crying out in that way. So it's not just that it's a categorical thing, but I think a lot of people tend to default to one category in the relationship. It seems like it's pretty on the face about being able to identify which camp you kind of are in. And you're kind of talking about this about either shutting down or the person who really is crying out. But what do you think are the things that they might be able to do better about expressing to the partner? Like when they're doing that, what are some things that you try to coach couples on in terms of how to actually express this when they're at the end of the day, let's say, and they get into that same pattern where one of them withdraws and the other one gets really anxious or angry or overwhelmed? What might you tell a person in each one of those positions to communicate in that moment that might help that conflict not erupt in that same way?
Yeah, definitely. One of the things that I immediately go to is the fact that we are, especially in relationships, we are pattern people. So we are going to do what is most comfortable for us. And it's surprising to people that fighting is actually something that we might be comfortable with, even though we don't love to do it. It might be more comfortable for us to go right into blaming our partner rather than like taking a pause and really trying to attune to what you might actually need. And it might be more comfortable for you to withdraw from your partner, even though you're actually longing to be seen and heard and understood.
So you're also saying there, it might be really uncomfortable to do the opposite. Can you say a bit about that? What's the discomfort that people feel when they don't do those things?
Yeah, I think couples especially feel a lot of discomfort at slowing things down. And I think that is one of the real benefits of couples therapy, is that you get to slow things down and find actually a lot of like safety in that. But in this scenario, if we're talking about, what you're in the middle of this argument, it's really uncomfortable to go against the grain and say, hold on, I think we're getting off track here, or hold on, I need a moment here to like really collect my thoughts, or, like really just breathe. Or even, if you have a lot of fights in the kitchen, as somebody's coming home from work or whatever, it's really uncomfortable to say, hey, instead of having this conversation here, can we go on a walk for a second? It can even be uncomfortable to just like change the scenery in which you're having a fight, which can be really helpful actually.
Or to even ask for what you need.
Yeah.
You're talking about making it really explicit. Instead of coming home and going, I'm going to just withdraw into the bedroom and disconnect and isolate myself. You're kind of describing, what if you were to tell your partner what you're needing?
Yep.
That's really hard, because I picture them putting their hand out like this and getting ready to be slapped, getting ready to be blamed.
Yeah.
And I wonder how much that stops somebody from actually saying it, is because they don't want to be rejected if they say it. That's a really vulnerable part, isn't it? About like making it explicit.
It is. Yeah. It's one of the most beautiful things you can do in the relationship. It's also the most vulnerable. And the thing with vulnerability is you're literally opening yourself up to the opportunity to get hurt. And safety, that safety component, is so important to build that safety in a relationship, to be able to name needs, to be able to speak to what's really happening underneath. I thought about this before we met, that I think a lot of couples would not really need couples therapy if they could have two chances to say what they really need. And the reason I say that is because a lot of couples, individuals will come in and react to essentially whatever they're feeling inside. So a blamer or a pursuer who is, feeling unseen in the dynamic might say, I need you to be a better husband. That might come out just immediately. Like, And what that does to somebody who might typically withdraw is to say, oh, I'm not good enough to be that husband that you need for me, so I'm going to withdraw. So it just kind of creates this pattern. What I would want to ask that person is, what are you really wanting them to hear right now? If you're saying, I need you to be a better husband, what is it that you're really trying to say to them? What do you mean by that? And my hope would be that as they take that second to really think about this, I do this a lot with couples where it's like, after they've said the kind of painful thing, even in the room, what are you really trying to mean by that? After they've taken a couple of seconds, my hope is that they can say something to the tune of, I just need some time to feel heard. I need some time to talk about what's happening here and what's been hurting me, because this is hurting the relationship.
So even just you asking them, for example, what do you mean?
Mm-hmm.
It allows them to shift from just saying something reactively to actually be trying to be thoughtful about, wait a second, I am trying to communicate something to him or her. What do I actually want them to hear? Mm-hmm. This isn't something that we normally do when we're overwhelmed or upset. And I think a lot of people know how to say it reactively, but here you're saying, like, if you even just give yourself a second chance, and instead of either saying something explosively or cutting off, to give yourself another chance at trying to communicate what you actually want with a person, there's a lot that can lead to in the relationship.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think what can be so hard about that is, because we're such ingrained people, a lot of our mind, when we're reacting, operates like a ski slope. The more you like press down on that snow, the more slippery it's going to be, the more easy it is for you to react in that way of either blaming or immediately withdrawing. And I think what you have to do, at least at the start of your relationship, is really disrupt that pattern. The way that I see that is by either taking a deep breath and closing your eyes in the middle of an argument. That might be so awkward at first, but it can be really instrumental in, kind of stopping or mitigating the communication that's happening in the room, and really trying to get to the source of, what am I actually really trying to say here? What do I need here? And some of the pain too is that might not be received immediately, but I truly do believe if we can disrupt some of the typical behaviors and patterns that come up in an argument, you'll have a lot more insight into what both of you are really needing, both of you are really searching for in a fight.
I think about, when you're talking about this, the sense that I get is that when somebody does a pursue pattern or withdraw pattern, the sense is that initially, oh, she just wants something from me. Let's say if they're pursuing, and so I feel like I'm turned into an object. And let's say that person can feel like, oh, they're punishing me, or they're like the parent who just needs me to do my chores. Yeah. Right. And then on the other side, it can feel like the other person just doesn't care. They've turned me into an object as well. Like, but can you speak to kind of what's behind that? Because what I'm also hearing as you start to talk about it is just how sensitive each person in the couple is to how much they need each other. Can you speak to that a bit?
Speak to the pattern that comes up for both of them, and
how much they're blinded in that situation to how much they actually really need each other. Yeah, we get a lot of information about our current relationships from our past relationships, what we've experienced and the wounds that we've received in the past. And so I think a pursuer might have learned, I need to get what I need to get, which might be love, might be care, all these things, by, earning it, by fighting for it, by, kind of scratching and clawing until I get what I need. And the withdrawer might have learned from their attachment wounds, I need to remove myself from the situation because I'm not going to get my needs met by this person, especially when they're acting like this. So I'm going to go and soothe and take care of myself over here. And so both of them are going to be kind of wounding each other and reminding each other of their past attachment wounds. The person who is withdrawing may feel not good enough, like when they felt not good enough from their dad, or when they, the pursuer may feel like, they're unworthy of love because their mother made them feel unworthy as a kid. Yeah.
And so when that comes up, you're really just repeating the pattern that you've done all your life, and acting out of that. But now when you have your individual wounds and individual patterns, now it's become this whole new cycle of how you relate together. And I call that the interactional pain cycle.
The interactional pain cycle. Can you say a bit about that?
Yeah, it's a term from restoration therapy. So Terry and Sharon Hargrave developed this, and the interactional pain cycle is literally a combo of this. I have the trusty little whiteboard.
Look at that.
And it has this is kind of the individual's pain cycle, which is feelings, which then lead into how they cope with those feelings. So someone who feels like they're not good enough might cope by withdrawing from the situation, and then other people will respond to that. And that typically informs, again, how they feel. So there's arrows that typically go in a cycle like this, because you get trapped in this kind of reaction cycle.
So give me an example there. So feelings to coping to others responding. So, for example, for the withdrawer, what's typically happening there?
Yeah, the withdrawer is typically feeling, you can feel a myriad of feelings, but we'll say, for instance, unloved. When they feel unloved, they're going to cope by numbing out or withdrawing, self-soothing. So, that can look like, going on their phone, scrolling, it can even mean different, substances or
addictive kind of stuff.
Addictive things.
So that's how they cope. They feel unloved, and then they cope by withdrawing, maybe doing something kind of addictive and separate.
Right. And the thing about that is that's the thing that your partner sees. So they may not see the underlying feelings behind it, but they do see the behaviors that come from it.
All they see is this person kind of moving away from me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which enacts their pain. This is where the others respond is so important in this cycle, is because this is when you start really just like getting in kind of a whirlwind almost of this person's responding that way. I'm feeling this. Now I'm reacting that way. So the others respond piece is for this individual, they may see their partner start to blame them, start to yell at them, or start to fight with them as they withdraw. And when that happens, so when a partner essentially says, you're not a good husband, or you didn't take the trash out, or something like that, that might trigger again the unloved feeling. I'm unloved, which can put you right back into your coping behavior, and then get you right back into others' response. So it's just
a storm.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a storm that a lot of couples don't know how to get out of.
So I'm trying to think about, okay, so if you're going to fix something there in the storm, it's pretty hard to fix what you immediately feel when another person withdraws or when they blame you. Yeah. You're going to have an immediate reaction. What do you try to help couples with first when they're in that cycle in terms of doing something different?
Yeah. Especially on the front end, a lot of my work with couples is just helping them notice when they are coping, because it's really hard in the moment, especially if you haven't built up this sort of rhythm of doing this, of recognizing. It's really difficult to have this kind of emotional awareness when you're in the midst of an argument or a fight. You may acknowledge that you're angry, but you may not know that it stemmed from an earlier discussion or an earlier interaction where you felt unloved. So that's kind of the deeper work that comes later. The first is to say, oh, wait, you're coping right now. So for a husband who's withdrawing, I might, notice that they're turned away from their partner. And I might say like, hey, you're kind of turned away right now. Like, I wonder what's happening for you. And, they may say something like, I'm angry because she said something about this. And, and that might be the kind of like the lean in there to really slow down what's happening in the room and actually get to what he might be feeling underneath all of that.
So it's like one of the first things is going, okay, when you feel something, there's something, if you're going to be close together or actually have better intimacy, you have to be careful about feeling something and then immediately coping in the same way that you've coped, either by blaming or by withdrawing.
Right.
And you have to become aware of yourself about what's happening. And then, like you're doing with them, somehow speak to it. So what happens when, let's say somebody's feeling unloved?
Mm-hmm.
What happens? What is it doing for a couple when one of them, let's go to the pursue thing just to kind of be balanced here. But let's say when that person's feeling, let's say, abandoned.
Yeah.
And the other person is withdrawn and they're like, they obviously don't care about me.
Mm-hmm.
And they can recognize that they feel abandoned or left alone or unimportant in that moment. What does it do for the couple, for that person to be able to express that with their words rather than blaming? What does that do for the couple?
Yeah, that I think is probably one of the most beautiful parts of couples therapy is it's the underneath that you don't get in a lot of dynamics at home. I think what it does for the couple is, especially for somebody who is the withdrawer, is they're seeing how their behavior is affecting the other person at a much deeper level than just, when I turn away from her, then that means that
she's angry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. She's blaming me. It's removing kind of this self-focused narrative from it, from the interaction, and actually saying, oh, wait, she actually feels abandoned. That can be so much more impactful than I'm abandoning her. There's way different.
It might be surprising to see them share something where they feel weak or they feel alone, or, I mean, that sounds so much softer, even hearing you say that, where it's like let's say a husband or a wife, whoever, where they're feeling abandoned and they can say that.
Yeah.
It's very different than the other person feeling like, oh, I'm just being blamed and they're upset at me. I'm being punished. I did something wrong again, to going, whoa, like they're actually feeling really, really low right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it allows for, the goal is for both of them to recognize that they're both actually relating out of these really painful feelings that can be difficult to voice at first, difficult to know that you're safe enough even to voice that. And so a goal of mine in the therapy room is to really make sure that they can both feel safe enough to voice those feelings, even if it is, not heard immediately. But when both of them can join together and be like, oh yeah, like I feel less than in this moment. And then the other can say, yeah, like I felt alone, and that can offer a lot more opportunity to say like, yeah, I hear that. I can understand how you would feel that way.
I'm just amazed if, like, even hearing you describe this is like a very, very common thing in couples. This is like almost every couple is this in some degree, and how much we all tolerate it in some sense of like, this is just how relationships are, or this is just how my husband is or how my wife is. But I don't know, it makes me think like, what are we missing out on if we keep going around that pain cycle, if we keep blaming the other person or the other person keeps withdrawing? What do you see in terms of what couples are missing out on if they stay there?
Yeah, I think the main thing that couples can miss out on is the opportunity to really lean in, the opportunity to really actually see where your partner is at. I think it can be so easy, especially, when you start having kids or when you just get kind of muddled in the busyness of life, to go in that survival mode and just kick in that autopilot like we talked about before. And that can be really helpful in a lot of senses, but it can be really destructive when your autopilot is causing further and further harm to the other person. So I think what couples miss out a lot of the opportunity of is to really see what is happening underneath. And we can get so caught up in what we're seeing right in front of us that we can really miss what's happening underneath.
And if they can explore what's happening underneath, what do you hope for that kind of couple?
I would hope that they can come up with new responses out of that seeing. And what I think the beauty of the modality that I operate from is that there actually is an opportunity to choose to either react to your feelings or respond to them. And that response can actually create a really beautiful cycle between the couple where both can live into their truth, what is true about them, which is most of the time that they are loved, or they are worthy, or they are seen, that they can live into that and then respond in a way that actually makes them both feel like they can get their needs met in the relationship. Because when we're fighting and when we're reacting out of our pain cycle, it's a need, like we talked about before, that's coming out sideways. It's coming out not in the way that we ever intended it to, but it's kind of what we believe is the only way that we're going to get our needs met. And my hope would be in couples therapy that you can learn new ways, actually more efficient and more beneficial ways to get your needs met, that lead to both of you feeling like you're seen and heard and understood.
Yeah, we depend on that, don't we? Of even with all of the attachment wounds and that we have and everything, I think it's amazing that we have these longings that come out in the pursue withdraw pattern. These longings for to be loved, to be held, to be seen, to be noticed. And I think we have an intuition that if we could have 10% more of that, let's say, or 50%, if we could just do it better than we're doing right now, like that something in us opens up, we feel more safe to put down the backpack, or to feel held or soothed at the end of the day. I think it's an incredibly minimized benefit that we're missing out on there. Of the process, because I think a lot of couples are scared to come into couples therapy often because it feels like, oh my gosh, it's going to unearth everything. But they don't realize how much they're both crying out for each other and how much they need each other.
I mean, couples therapy alone is actually a vulnerable place to be in, because it's actually naming a need, and it's believing that you're in a place where you can actually name that need or have to name that need. And I think that's why a lot of couples come in and they feel like the car that they're driving, to use a metaphor, has just been completely totaled and they don't know what happened. I think that happens a lot, where they're just shocked with what is in front of them. Like, what happened to our relationship? How did we go 14 years down this road of relating to each other in this way and just believing that that was okay? Now we're here in couples therapy. We need this really bad. How do we change this pattern? And I think, there's actually a lot of beauty to that, to start there. It's not pretty to get to that place, but it is beautiful to get to this space where you're actually both acknowledging that you have a need now. I think that can be just empowering enough to keep a couple moving forward.
That's wonderful, John. Thank you. And if you're listening and that's something that resonates with you, either the pursue or withdraw thing, I think there's a lot to take away from this, not just of what you can do now, but what you're also aiming for in your relationship, what you're wanting more of, to recognize when you're withdrawing that you're actually wanting to feel loved, and like there's a space for you. And that when you're pursuing, when you're blaming, it's not out of some kind of harshness, but it's this part of you that has felt totally abandoned and needs to know that you matter to the other person. And I think there's a lot of space to create new skill around that, to actually be able to practice that together, as hard as it is. Like you're saying, there's a really hopefulness of just them acknowledging and coming in. It's not dreary. It's actually a really hopeful thing when they come in to actually experience something new together. Yeah.